Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday and are keeping safe from COVID-19. Welcome back to the 18th webinar of the series Greenpeace boosted by Greenpeace Africa. These are a series of webinars designed to improve our participants' knowledge on current environmental issues and give guidance on what actions one can take part in. I'm your host, I'm Wansi Barbara, a Greenpeace volunteer from Cameroon. Okay then. So in today's webinar, we shall be discussing on Greenpeace Africa 2021 Outlook. And we are privileged to have Mr. Lagi Toribau, who will be interviewed by two young climate activists, Mr. Resha Noor Mohammed, an 80-year-old intersectional activist from Johannesburg, who works on raising awareness about the climate crisis using art form. And we also have Ms. Anesh Mugur, a 13-year-old environmental activist from Mauritania, who is part of the Fridays for Future movement. And over to you, Ressa.
Hello, I'm Risa. Am I asking questions now? Am I asking the questions now?
Yes,
sorry.
You can proceed.
Okay. Okay, so question 1. What is something from 2020 that you want to take into 2021?
Great, thank you. Raisha, for that question, and also Barbara for the introduction. Firstly, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself, and before I dive in and how I'm in this journey. So I'm Lagi Toribau. I'm currently the Executive Director Interim for Greenpeace Africa. I've been with Greenpeace, I think, since 2001. I started as a volunteer. So my heart and my passion has never doubted me being in this journey. Somehow I keep on ending up in Africa. There's quite a lot to do here. And there's quite a lot of opportunities that also sits in this amazing continent. So I'm very privileged to be sitting here today and to be having a conversation with Raisa and Anesh and youth climate movement. So I'm hoping that I will be able to provide some level of understanding of what we do and what 2021 looks like. I guess just in quick response to your question, I think 2020 took all of us by surprise. Some of us hijacked our lives and some of us, I think, allowed a lot of questioning of things that are happening around us. I view 2020 as some sort of an awakening. It was a year of disruptions. I think there's no hiding away from the impact of COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement. I think the climate crisis, even before 2020, it was always ongoing, but it came up a bit more further up into the surface. So on a number of multiple fronts, I, as a person, I really took a bit of time to also look at 2020 as a year of change, where I think that there was a lot that was forced down on us that was outside of our control. There are, I guess, for me, going into 2021, there are a number of things that I'm taking to heart. One is just the realization a lot more deliberately that disruption can happen anytime, and it can happen at different levels. I think what transpired last year was probably at a significant level that affected humanity across the world. So I think for me, we always have to anticipate that disruption is going to be part of the way in how we work. The broken system. We already know that the political system has already failed us. The economic system is only in the hands of a few. The way in how our social structure is set up has sort of moved us away from recognizing the basic relationship that we have with each other. So I think it reaffirms that what we already know was really unearthed and brought up to the surface in 2020. So I would like to take into 2021 a bit more of a better way of analyzing the system. And the final one, I think, is change is inevitable. And I think we can't be too pedantic of holding on to things that are either materialistic or old way of thinking or how we do things. And I think we have to evolve. We have to change. We have to be constantly responsive. And one is from an organizational perspective, basically making sure that we're responding to changes that are happening. But also that the era that we're living in now, there's no way that we'll be able to do anything alone. So we have to do a lot more partnership work. And as a leader in the organization, it's really forced me to be empathetic and to continue to build resilience in the organization, but also with staff. So those are just some of the few highlights I would like to start off with. Thank you, Raisha.
Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful answer, and it addressed so many things. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so question number 2: what are your long-term goals for Greenpeace Africa? What do those look like?
Yeah, that's an aspirational one, and also one that is dependent on a lot of things. But I think from the outset, I would like to envision an organization that is relevant. I think that's probably the most important thing for me, and that sits on a number of levels. One is we carry a very big brand that represents quite a lot, the Greenpeace identity. We also recognize that being in Africa means a lot of different things. And we, rather than trying to figure that one out on our own, I think this is a continuous journey from the decade that we've been in existence here. And on the sort of on the ground level, I really would like the organization to matter for people in what we do. And we can interpret that in different ways, but at the end of the day, I think the mission of the organization is the protection of the environment, and to making sure that we, as human beings, are able to live in peace and in harmony with our natural environment. So I think there's still quite a lot of things and work that we need to do in making sure that we are relevant. I think the other area is a lot more visibility. And visibility for me is not just the number of hits that we get on our social media channel, those that engages on our different platforms. I think this is visibility for change. And that we are also not too restricted to the places in which we operate. And I think this comes back to the previous question around Greenpeace being a lot more responsive as an organization, because there's a lot of the continent, social justice challenges. And I think we need to kind of be a lot more creative in the way in how we work. And I think a lot of this is also that we can't be operating solely. We have to do a lot more deliberately with partners. Particularly on the climate crisis, I just want to touch on this a bit. The climate crisis, it's a no-brainer that this is one of the biggest threats that's facing humanity, and particularly for us here in Africa. Greenpeace as a global organization, we've prioritized on this. So this is something that we will continue to work on in the long term. And the reality of the crisis here in Africa, I think we're living this daily. And I'm hoping that we can ensure that we are campaigning effectively. And then we try as much as we can in partnership with others to avoid the worst impacts of this crisis and to really build resilience and increasingly the unpredictable reality in the world that we live on. We want to continue to strengthen and support the climate movement in Africa. I think that's one of our ambition. And we want to do it in, again, looking at how we connect with social justice, environmental justice, and humanitarian organizations as well. And connected to climate justice, and I'm going to go on a wing here a bit. One of the things that I find quite visible in the continent is the dominant development model. So the development and growth model is what sort of drives our system for more, for bigger, for money, for all of that. And it's based on extractivism. And this continues to perpetuate the stress that we're already feeling in our biodiversity areas and some of our natural resources. We know that it's unsustainable. So we want to be able to sort of deeply imagine a key role that Greenpeace Africa can play on the long term in challenging this pathway of growth and development, and trying to completely reimagine a new type of future that we can expect.
Cool, that was such a great response. And as someone who I always talk about complete system change, and I always stress that intersectionality, and you can't have climate justice if it doesn't work with social justice, especially in a continent like Africa, who was completely, like the colonization, it was such an injustice, and people in Africa are still suffering from those effects, like the effects of colonization and the climate crisis. So that was such a great response, because it has that intersectionality, and it also talks about how important it is to work together, because Africa is such a massive continent, and every single voice needs to be heard. Like, that's so important. So that was just such a great response. Okay, so question 3, and you half answered that in question 2, and it's kind of linked. What are you planning on doing this year to meet those long-term goals?
So I mean, I guess I'll probably touch first on the kind of the bigger system, and then I'll probably focus down a bit on sort of the climate crisis. So I think on the bigger, like challenging the system and looking at sort of the trajectory of growth and development in Africa, and it's a bigger space, which when we open it up, the imagination goes wild. I think that there are a few foundations that are in it that I think we as an organization, we are probably not going to come with all of the answers, but we need to create the space for different voices and different people to be able to come together and co-create it. And I think we need to kind of start thinking beyond the margins of the remit of the types of work that we do, environmental, humanitarian, health, and all of that. I think there's a sense of solidarity that we need to enhance. And I'm deliberately saying this because if you look at, for instance, our political system across Africa, we know that it's failing us. We know what's not working. And it's not just coming out of the environmental movement. It's not only just coming out of the social justice movement. It's not only coming out with health, with teachers, etc. I think we are all singing the same thing. I think that there is something in there around the system that is currently running us is not working. And I think last year really exposed that. And I think that there's an element in there around building solidarity. I think the spaces around the way in how we have gotten down in life that we have this competitive mindset, and that's perpetuated by the system. I look at the education systems, for instance. I mean, I'm going to ask this very openly, like, whose history are they teaching us? Whose ideas are they ingraining in the way that we are? The lifestyle that our system allows us to aspire. Like I'm I'm one person that challenges the mindset of, why do you have to have a big house, credit cards, money, or like a flashy car? Like, for me, this is an aspiration of a quality of life that has been ingrained in history, the Western influence, you name it. And I think we've gotten too far, that we probably need to come back to having a conversation around the basics of what will make us be respectable to each other: resilience, survival, relationship with each other. And I think that to me is the level of imagination I really would like to bring a lot more. So that's on the bigger scale of things. Now, if we look at the impending crisis that is upon us, when we're looking at sort of the long term and what we will focus on Greenpeace Africa on climate, we released a report last year, I think it was in November, called the Weathering the Storm, which makes it clear that the scale of the threat that we're facing in Africa when it comes to the climate crisis. And I would really, really encourage you all to have a read of that report. And as part of that report, we've already started urging governments in Africa to begin declaring a climate emergency. And I think that's step one, climate emergency. I think we need to uplift it, that there is something. Yes, this has been tried, but I think there's a lot underneath that we need to be able to amplify. And in 2021, we also intend to build on that and make sure that we're building a program that is allows us to be effectively changing that extractivist development model. And also, I think not only doing that, but we also need to put forward and push for alternative thinking and alternative approaches. I think there's quite a lot information that's there around technology, etc. But I think that this is also, again, the conversation that we need to co-create with each other. It's not only like renewable energy, for instance, on one side. This is alternative thinking, the alternative thinking of the way and how we want to be able to live in a world that meets all of our ambition. It's safe, it's sound, the environment is clear. We have foundations of how we have relationship with each other. I mean, and with what we've started off this year with terrible cyclones, I think Eloise, as we're currently living it through now, it's going to become more of an occurrence. So I'm not naive to the reality that the climate impacts in Africa is real. I think this is kind of part of the work that we need to do in partnership with others. Like, we're not going to pretend that we're going to be a humanitarian organization. We're not going to pretend that we will be able to do more like other social justice movements. Like, I think gone are the days that we have to be kind of competing for spaces. I think this is the time when we need to be able to look at each other's strengths, put our heads together, look at it from the perspective of people that are being affected. First and foremost, it's not about us as an organization, it's about the people on the ground. And I think that that's one of the kind of steers that I'm anticipating in 2021. And of course, challenging the fossil fuel industry. This is always fun. We scream, we shout, we can do our nonviolent direct actions and so on. So I think we will want to continue challenging the fossil fuel industry. And just finally on this one, climate activists, youths, you are the future. And we wanna be able to enable the work that you wanna do, your vision, yeah? And I know we started skill sharing a bit in last year. And I think that there's still a lot that we need to uncover with each other. And the approach that I really want to take is that we need to learn more from you and to know what kind of support you need to further nurture your movement. And you know, there are many small springs and streams that are starting to join to be a river. So I think that's the image that I want to leave with you.
Thank you. I was at that skills share, and we drew the river and all of that, and it was lovely. And I think everything you said is just, it's so important. And that kind of leads to my next question, what you said about the youth and helping the youth, which is, how do you plan to make the space more inclusive and accessible? Because we know there's so many young people in Africa, but so many of them don't have, like, they're unable to access like the wider platform, and so their voices aren't being heard and are constantly ignored by media. So how do you plan to,
Yeah. And this is this one is it should be a no-brainer. I think that I should probably start with that. I'm realizing more and more that, one, I think the intent of inclusivity and the intent of kind of co-creation and working a lot more in movement is something that I think we all agree to in principle. The how we do that, right? And I think that's where we get stuck, because automatically we go back to resources, we go back to timelines, we go back to mandates, we go back to who's doing what and all that. I probably want to take a bit of a step back and kind of put a bit of structure to how we plan to make the spaces more inclusive and accessible. So I think, one, as a matter of principle, that equity and inclusion, they are non-negotiables. Yeah, it's non-negotiable. And I think one of the things that you touched on earlier, Raisa, was intersectionality. So for me, this term on intersectionality, the way I literally visualize this in my mind is one person can have multiple identities, right? And those identities can come into play in different sectors. But it doesn't mean that, one, you should never be apologetic about it. Yeah, I'll put myself in the front line here, for instance. I'm an Indigenous. I'm from a little island in Fiji. I consider myself young. I'm a person of color. And I'm currently sitting in a leadership position. And I have a lot of values that sometimes I question myself. But what I've learned through my experience is it's the relationship that we have with each other, and it's the basic approach of respect. You know, not one person is superior than the other. It doesn't even matter what position you hold, to be honest, or what age group you're in. there's a level of decency, and there's a level of humanity that we need to. And I think some organization we've gone far down to being so output driven that we've forgotten the relationship that we need to have each other inside our own organization first and foremost, and even with our partners and those that we work with. So I'm hoping that in our relationship and how we plan to make the space more inclusive and accessible, it doesn't become robotic. It doesn't become, this is what we can, this is the organization. It doesn't become that too rigid. And it's a lot more about fostering the relationship that we want to have with each other. And a lot of that is finding out, what do you need? And what can we do to be able to support you?
Thank you so much. Your answers are really, they go so far into the question. So thank you so much for that. And I so much connect with what you're saying. And we all, when you said that we have these ideas in principle, it really resonates, because like in my own activism, I've seen just how privileged I am to be able to be an activist, to be able to access these spaces, and like doing things like volunteer work. You can just see how disconnected people as volunteers are from the people that they're helping. Like you see there's that level of seeing people as charity and not as people. Like, and that's something I think that we need to work on, not only as like organizations and stuff, but within ourselves too. And so my last question is, I think, more of a positive one. What are you looking forward to in 2021? So like anything, what are you looking forward to?
Well, one, I would really love to see my family back in Fiji. But you know, yeah. Let's see how the world evolves into 2021. Impact. I think if there's one thing, I would really love to see impact, and impact in a way that we start to change and impact people's lives. And that's in a very pragmatic way. If I were to flip this question around and to kind of put forward a challenge, one of the things that has always been, I think, dear to my heart is imagining a different way of life and reconfiguring the aspirations that we have, that again goes back to that thing around growth and development, and we reinstitute some level of humanity in the way in how we have relationships with each other. I mean, if there's one thing, and I foster this in my work and inside the organization with my teams, and I know it's in a lot. It sounds simple, but it's challenging for others. It's challenging, and I'm not saying that lightly. To challenge your mindset, to look at another person, irrespective of what you know, what you've heard, the baggage that comes with it. Decency, respect, and work together. Like, I think if we get back to some of these basic things in our humanity, and I'm from an organizational perspective, yes, we'll have campaign plans. Yes, we'll have strategies. Yes, we'll work in partnership with others. But if we lose ourselves in it, how are we going to be able to extend that level of awareness as human beings to the people that we're trying to impact and change their lives? And I think that that's the one thing for me in 2021 that I want to be able to continue to cultivate.
That's so lovely. And what's been so lovely about this engagement is that you've given such human and like such deep responses. So just thank you for that. I really hope you get to see your family this year. Things are so difficult this year, and I really hope that you're able to. I guess you want to go and visit them because, yeah. So that's the end of my questions, and I think I can hand it over to Anesh.
Hello, everyone. All right, so I'm Anesh. I already introduced myself. I'm just going to head straight to the questions. So Raiza has already asked some of the questions I intended to ask, but that's all right. I've got some more left. So the questions I'm going to be asking are going to be a bit more specific about certain issues that people are facing. So my number one question is, how does Greenpeace intend to involve Indigenous communities in upcoming projects this year? And how do you plan to integrate social justice in these upcoming projects?
Wow, thanks for that. Those two really big, important questions, Anish. So Indigenous community and incorporating social justice. And I think that there was also a question from Afzal on social justice and climate justice. All right, so let me touch on a bit on Indigenous communities. So to start off with, I rather not speak for Indigenous communities. I think that's one principle to go into. You can't, and we shouldn't, try and anticipate what they need or what they want. I think the approach should be in a form of a relationship with them. So there are a few things that we already know. One, the intent, the level of knowledge they have, and the stories of resilience of how they've lived through generations. And I think that that's one area that I think is a good starting point with Indigenous community, is to learn from them and is to understand them a bit more. We're so ingrained in the Western philosophy and the way in how answers are defined. I think the value of the Indigenous community on I think I want to establish first the reason why we need to be able to engage with them. And I think that to me is quite significant. And a lot of this means that we'll also have to restrict ourselves from not just going in and trying to have the answers and pretend that we are here to defend them. And in some cases, they probably go, we actually don't need you to come and defend us. We just need you to listen, for instance. So I'm deliberately not trying to sort of have the answer of what we can do, but I think I want to really establish the journey. And I really want to establish the kind of relationship that we have with each other. And I think part of that is I think that it's also quite clear that the way in how they're adapting to the impacts of climate on their livelihood, food security, their way of life, their culture and traditional practices, a whole array of issues. There's no shortage of it. And I think we need, in a very simplistic way, in order to work with them, we need to know what they need. And it might be that Greenpeace can't provide that. And it might be that there's other organizations that we need to put them in touch with. So I think I'm also a lot more conscious that in terms of either new areas that we work with or new communities that we will have to engage with or new sectors, it's not that we will have all of the answers and Greenpeace can't be the go-to for everything. You know what I mean? I really would like to kind of embed the approach of partnership in a way that we know our strengths, we know what we can deliver, but we also know that there are other organizations that are more rooted on the ground that have more expertise than us, et cetera. So I think for me that that approach on the Indigenous community is probably a lot more meaningful in the way in how we can structure our work this year.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure I learned a lot from that answer. My next question is, as a leader of such a big environmental organization, what do you think is the most effective way to sensitize the population about the climate and ecological crisis?
Thanks for that, Anish. Yeah. All right. So if we look at the science on climate and the ecological, like our environmental boundaries, it's super clear. We are living in an era that we are reaching the tip, and that the system that, again, I think I'm kind of going to go back a bit into the system that is supposed to deliver us to a better place is failing. And I think that's, so from the perspective of the crisis that we're facing, it's going to continue to perpetuate. And if we look at the system that we are hoping that will deliver us from this, I think that's a starting point in there. One, the power, the political power. Yes, we can continue to fight the current political systems and power systems, but we also need to create an alternative power system. And I'm not saying that in a very literal interpretation of power, but I think this is where the rising movement comes in, where we start running different narratives, where we start demanding for change in a broader sense. And this is why it's dear to my heart again that the climate and the climate youth movement is so important. I mean, it's clear. You are the future. You are seeing the impacts of this now. You know what is at stake, and you can start to imagine the kind of future that you also want to be able to live in. So I think that there is an element of disruption that we need to continue to do, and that's an area that we as an organization can help on. I think on the deeper level, on a personal level, I think what I was alluding to in the exchange with Raisha is on our mindset, as individuals. And I think on one hand is we know the impact, we know the changes that's happening in our own lifestyle, and yet there is still that aspirational trajectory of wanting more. And I really want to be able to challenge every individual in the continent about changing that mindset and running with that narrative of going back to the basics, and to be able to kind of reimagine the kind of world and life that we live in. For Greenpeace as an organization, we're not going to be shifting from our mandate. We will do what we need to do, but one of the things that we will be focusing a lot more on this year in terms of trying to help with this climate and ecological crisis is that we recognize that there's no way that Greenpeace as an organization can do this alone in the continent. We have to work more with environmental movements, with other movements, social justice, etc. And I think you're gonna see a lot more of that coming.
Thank you for your answer. It was a great answer. It was very relevant to what I asked in my question. Do you think that cognitive dissonance could play a role into why people don't want to take action?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there is a sort of different level of dimensions that are at play, I guess, on a personal level, depending on where you are. I don't want to go into a bit of a philosophical conversation on this, but I think the particularly here in Africa with the history of colonialism, and the pain that you've had to endure to the era that we're living in now, I think needs a level of sorry. Let me just take a bit of a step back. I think that we know the crisis that is in front of us. We know the injustices, yeah? We kind of have a sense of what needs to happen. We all have different interpretation of that. That is at a very institutional sort of level. When we come down, I think the level of awareness that we have, the level of willingness to act, and the level of putting yourself in the front line also differs. And I think if you look at the way in how Greenpeace globally works, is the way in how we undertake our engagement recognizes this, that there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach because we're all at different levels. And I think the change that we want to be able to inspire, I think needs to be set to kind of help people imagine, if you had to do this, this is the this is the impact, and this is the kind of world that we could live on, or could be living in. So yeah, getting people to act is never easy. And I think part of this kind of exercise, where we're talking, where we're sharing experiences, and it should never just be about, you know, a leader just comes and have a conversation with you. I think the richness of the story that exists with you, I think we should encourage a lot more of that. And some of the solutions are also with you. And it does not always have to be with an organization. Sorry, Anish, if that's a bit too winded from your question.
No, it's fine. I understand. I mean, I can't just ask you a question and you give me like an answer, like literally like what the answer is. There's a lot more to it. Another question I have, maybe I should do some research on this, but does Greenpeace recognize industrial farming as an issue, which is like one of the main causes to climate change?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the agriculture sector is it's quite an important sector in the continent, and I mean, I think when we look at from sort of food security, I think when we're looking at sort of the food security perspective, it really becomes the option of alternative. To be able to kind of feed the masses. I think we've got a lot of problem with a lot of industrial agriculture practices. And I think that there's enough in there for us to be able to say, but I think we, rather than focusing on the actual sort of industry, which is part of the work that we do, I think for here in the continent, I think the prevalent reason why is really about food security. And I think, and that is not only from a resilience perspective because of the climate crisis, but that's because of the dependency of it for for millions of people in the continent. So yeah, we also have expertise. I think Claire is here also from our team in Kenya, as she was leading one of our works on our food campaign in Kenya.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I got what I wanted, which was the answer I was looking for. Another question I have is, does Greenpeace Africa have this project on permaculture? Like, are you planning to promote this way of living this year through 2021? When I say permaculture, I mean like not dependent on corporations and companies, and, you know, having your own garden with your own vegetables and being self-reliant.
Yeah, so I'll probably respond to this in two ways. So one is as it's a management response, I guess, that kind of responds to the challenges that, you know, depending on where we are. I think the principles surrounding, sort of underneath that, is, you know, one of the things that we that is well within sort of some of the aspiration that we also promote is self-sufficiency, and sort of moving away from our dependency on foreign like whether it's foreign aid or foreign practices, etc. And I think that's one principle. And the other is, depending on where we are, there are different types of responsive strategies that can be deployed. And I think, you know, for us is we're not too sort of rigid on what, but and I think it really depends on the needs. And as a matter of principle for Greenpeace as an organization, we're really trying to move people away from their dependency on systems that continue to sort of perpetuate environmental degradation. So yeah, it's not a yes or no direct answer, but we look at that a lot more kind of strategically, but there are a few principles that sort of underline what we would consider acceptable or not.
Thank you, thank you. But at the same time, when you look at it, don't you think that permaculture could be one of the solutions, not only to climate change, but also to globalization, to capitalism? It makes us more self-reliant. So in a way, don't you think that this should be one of our main priorities, promoting this and making it more popular so that everyone is aware of this way of living?
I definitely know that there are big movements on permaculture globally. I lived in Australia, I lived in Europe, in Asia. I've seen it work. So I mean, I think this kind of, I mean, for me is as an organization, rather than you know, saying we'll run a permaculture campaign, if there are existing movements, I think that's probably a starting point, because there are those that are probably have the knowledge, they have the expertise, they have the resources on the ground. And, you know, if Greenpeace were to consider such certain initiatives, the question would be, what's the role that we play, for instance? So I think that that's sort of normally the thinking and the approach that we normally take if there are issues that are outside of sort of the current mix of the work that we do.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Now, my last question, I've been asking you lots of questions, but now I've come to my last one. It's a very broad question. You can answer it in many different ways, and it's quite a tricky one too. So do you think that the Greenpeace organization or any other major environmental conservation organizations could play a role in eradicating the problem of green capitalism and ecofascism, or are there strategies that maybe these organizations could use to eradicate this problem?
Yeah. Yes, I think this to me goes back to the importance of doing system thinking, which is one of the things that Greenpeace is doing a lot more of, and it's kind of, we're trying to really embed it in. So one is, I mean, yeah, the issue around the capitalist model, the international liberal world order, fascism and all of that. I think there's no, we're definitely all on the same page in terms of it's not working and it's failed us. I think the important thing to note is when we start doing deep system thinking, we need to know where we've come from. We need to know what's not working, why it was broken, to be able to kind of aspire to that. So I think the motivation of the fact that we've become so economically driven by the interests of a few, whether it's political, whether it's economical, is why we're here. And I think on a very foundational level, we need to grab that. We need to be able to challenge that at its core. Even if we don't have the answer to what the alternative might be looking like. I think that the challenge that I have seen through my experience is that the way in how we try and challenge the system, we end up putting band-aid solution to the broken system, but the system in itself is still intact. And if it stops the bleeding from one end, it just comes out on the other. And that's why I think the level of imagination can't be from just revamping the current broken system to something that is just a step forward. Like, I think the imagination is bigger. And my sense is that it can't just go immediately to a model. I think it's the conversation, because the era in which we're living in now, the realities of the environmental injustices, social justice, population growth, like the whole paradigm of the challenges that humanity is facing now, has dramatically changed to when those systems were instituted. So I think for me is I always try and take a step back to not try and get immediately to an answer of what would resolve the current challenge. It's really around kind of it's scrutinizing that a bit more, looking at where we are, doing a reality, and then co-create the kind of future that we live in. I wrote a blog last year, towards the end of last year, to just, I'm a deep thinker. So I tend to take time when I'm under intense pressure. And a lot of this was I tried to make sense of 2020. And I tried to make sense of what I've learned. I tried to make sense of my experience, and I tried to make sense of my role as a leader in an organization, to be able to first and foremost come to terms with myself on where we are, what are things that are within our control, what are things that are that are outside of our control but we can influence, and what are things that are in my control as a leader. And I went through that, and it's up on our website. I would also encourage you to have a read of that. And one of the things that came quite clear in my mind is individual power, the power that we all hold as individuals. If there's anything, I think we need to cultivate that.
Okay, thank you. So that was my last question. Thank you for all your responses. Thank you for your time. I've learned a lot today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anish. I guess it's back to Barbara, and should I just try and see if I can go through some of the questions that's on the chat, if I can respond to?
Lagi, let me read you some of the questions. I think one that you've already answered is, can social justice and climate justice ever be achieved in a world that is so driven by the capitalist means of production and monopoly capitalism, whereby decisions are taken by a few but impacts on many? I think that ties in with the last answer that you gave, Anesh. And then there's another question. Do you think that the only way to achieve any form of social justice will be attained, be the redistribution of wealth and resources, whereby all citizens of the world buys into the concept of climate justice? The poor are so busy surviving the impacts of colonialism and exploitation that they are totally divorced from being involved in saving the planet Earth.
Great. Wow. That's a great question. And I think I have a few books that I'll also be able to share on that. Yeah, so let me, I guess, let me just try and establish first my understanding of social justice, climate justice, as sort of a term that we use in sort of trying to imagine the unbalance, I guess, on one hand, that we all experience, and the other is what we're trying to aspire to, which I think is sort of a greener and a peaceful world that we all want to live in. Yeah, like I think that's the kind of framing that's in my mind, and then to kind of really try and position social justice or climate justice. So I'll just try and unpack for you a bit more what that means in my mind. So the sort of the narrative that we play is that there's an established sense of inequality and an injustice that occurs. And that kind of spins quite a lot. And I think when we dig deeper into that, it might be that it surfaces that these injustices, whether it's from the kind of social rights movement, whether it's humanitarian, whether it's the environmental movement, it points to the same root causes. And whether or not that's the kind of capitalist model when we look at the economic sector, or whether that's the liberal world order in how we've been designed politically, how we've been structured politically globally. Yeah, like I think if we go deeper, it points to the same sort of system that we're trying to fight. Now, and I think that that's sort of one of that's one of the kind of common grounds that we're slowly seeing why more organizations are starting to come together. It's because we're realizing that it's the same thing we're fighting for, irrespective of how we're looking at it. Now to try and imagine, what we want to be able to, how we want to be able to move it forward, I think we need to unpack that a bit more. So one is, I think we all aspire to equity. And I think for equity, that needs to be unpacked in terms of the different levels of what that means. Is it the kind of equality on opportunities, the equality on the way in how our, say for instance, our pay system is designed? Is it equality to the way in how basic services are provided, for instance? So I think that's one stream of justice for me. I think the second one is, we all know that Africa is diverse, for instance, and I think establishing that and then going deeper, what does this actually mean for me? And I think a lot more of that is we need to celebrate it a bit more. And I think we need to be a lot more bolder in the way in how we put our diversity up front, in the way in how we communicate, in the way in how we work. And I think another pillar to this is that the injustices has perpetuated through history a sense of lack of safety for certain parts of, whether it's race or communities. And I think that that's where some of the pain, that's where some of the pain sits, that I think requires a different type of conversation. And I think we can't do this without some level of healing, some level of reconciliation before we can establish trust to be able to kind of get us to a way where we can lift our minds to be able to be aspirational in the change that we want to see. And I think on I'm sorry, my question is a lot more sort of deeper than what you're trying to ask for, but I think at the bigger level, at the global level, or at the system level, we all know what's not wrong. But I think we need to deliberately unpack that to the way that we can resonate, that we are not just seeing that there's another model that's been created that goes against capitalism or goes against the political order. I think we need to kind of take it down to a level where we can come with like, this is what we mean by justice and how we interpret that.
Thank you, Lani, for answering that question. We have another question here. How do you plan to connect youths in countries where no Greenpeace chapters, like here in Tanzania?
Yeah, so probably to start with is like, I think we're going to be putting in a bit more of our sort of human resources as an organization to explore what we can do more of with youths. So I think what that translates to is that we're not going to be restricted to where we currently hold relationships with youth movements. So one of the things that is definitely not on our radar right now is to kind of consider opening up an office, for instance, where we're not. So I think that's I just want to verbalize that for the time being. The approach that we're taking is that youths as a community, the power and the role and the importance of your voice and the imagination that you could help establish in the kind of change that we're trying to embrace is super important. And I really, really, really would not want us to look at this from a geographical sort of placement, but really looking at the movement as a whole. Where we are able to provide you with the support directly, we will. Where we are restricted, we might approach partners on the ground and see how we might be able to do that. Or we might be able to come up with other innovations where we are not entirely present in your activities, but we might consider options of saying supercharging some of your work. Or enabling some of the spaces that you might be able to create, or using some of our channels. So I think that there's the types of ways in how we could foster this kind of relationship is more. And that's why when I started, I said that I definitely don't want to already assume that we know what you need. And I don't want to assume that we will have all of the answers or we will have all of the resources for you. I want to be able to explore this. And I think the first thing is to be able to know your needs first, irrespective of where you are in the continent, because I think the importance of this movement, it's a really a no-brainer for Greenpeace Africa, so that, you know, we're going to be making sure that we are ready and we stand with you in partnership to be able to provide the support that you need.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question here from Facebook. What are the campaigns focused for Kenya, and how far is the water pollution work for Kenya?
We have Claire here with us, so I might just start this off and see, Claire, if you've got anything to add. So we have decided to take a bit of a different approach in our work in Kenya since last year. So as most of you would probably know, that we used to run a food campaign where we worked a lot with communities. We sort of reoriented a bit last year together with our staff in Kenya to look at a bit more of an agile approach to how we look at environmental issues, to look at social justice issues, to look at sort of what is happening in Kenya. And so we're not too restricted to an issue that we work on. So it's very much in a live stage right now. And there are a few things that is embedded in the sort of choices that we make as an organization on what we decide to sort of end up working on, for instance. And that includes the water pollution issue that I know that the office in Kenya have been discussing quite a bit last year. So one is that we have a good grasp of sort of what are the environmental challenges in Kenya, and it's quite broad and vast and big. We look a lot more closely now at what we can do in partnership with other organizations. We look more also into sort of establishing Greenpeace as a prominent voice, considering that this is one of our newest office in the continent, and also sort of building a bit on our base. And part of that is sort of our fundraising initiative. So we've had to kind of pivot a bit from what we normally used to work on, and the space in which we're in right now is that we will be a lot more sort of diverse and agile and responsive to the different environmental issues that are there in Kenya. So I don't have the information on water pollution specifically, but I know it's kind of in the list of areas that our Kenya team have been exploring to date. Claire, I might just ping you in case there's anything you want to add on this before Tracy asks the next question.
No, Lagi, nothing from me for now.
Great, thanks.
Great. Our final question is from James from Rwanda. He says, some of us youths, for example, here in Rwanda, are working on various green climate projects, but we lack external and international exposure, as well as access to finance to propel these projects. How can this be bridged?
Thank you, James, for that question. I think first thing is get in touch with us. Yeah, let us know what you're working on, what partnerships you have, what are your needs. I obviously can't give you a promise on this, but I think the journey that we're taking, and I think part of this webinar is I encourage youth movements across Africa to reach out to us. We might not be able to give you everything that we need, but we'll also be able to connect you to those organizations that might be a lot more closer and have what sort of support that you might require. But I think the first step, James, would be to reach out to us, and then we can take it on from there. But please continue doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Langi. That comes to the end of our Q&A section. Thank you so much for the participants for joining in on this Zoom webinar call and also on Facebook. Thank you, Anesh and Ressa, for your questions. Thank you so much, Langi. It has been quite an honor for you to be here and answer our questions. So for the participants, if you haven't filled the poll, please be sure to fill it still on your screen. And otherwise, thank you so much. We hope to meet all of you in the next webinars. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.